Hi, my name is Dawn Godwin, and I will be doing one of the presentations this week on social influence. Social influence happens through a variety of complex processes that occur when individuals feel pressure from social groups, perceived authority figures, or other social norms to change or shift strongly held attitudes, beliefs, or behaviors. In day-to-day situations, we may automatically respond to social influence without even realizing it. Studies show that mimicry is a behavior demonstrated by all of us and is a social influence process that we are often not even aware of. More interesting are the explicit forms of social influence. This is when we choose whether or not we will go along with the social powers that be. Are we going to yield to influence or resist it? As we continue our study of social influence this week, we looked at three explicit processes associated with yielding to social influence. These processes are conformity, compliance, and obedience, and can be visualized on a continuum. In addition, social impact theory provides us with other elements to consider. Social impact theory states that individuals can either be sources or targets of social influence, and social impact is the result of the strength of the source of impact, the immediacy of the event, and the number of sources exerting power. One of this week's assigned journal articles focused on the explicit social influence process of conformity. The study that is the subject of this article looked at the role of conformity in relation to adolescence and abstention from unhealthy drinking behaviors. When we think of teenagers, we naturally think of their susceptibility to peer pressure and their ability to resist the pressure to conform to the majority norms of their social groups. Parents fear the negative influence that might result from getting in the wrong crowd. This study finds evidence that being a non-drinking teenager in a friendship group where the majority drink does not actually put them at risk of drinking. I will discuss this study further in a moment. A study of social influence would not be complete without looking at social influence in a group context. As we learned over the past few weeks, we are not contained to our individual self. We are social beings, and as such, our self-concept is intertwined with our social self. We are drawn to others who we identify with, giving us rise to in-groups and out-groups, as seen in social identity theory. In this week's textbook reading, we looked at the fundamental concepts of groups. What is a group? What are the key features of groups? We looked at how individuals function in groups. What are the effects that the presence of others can have on individual members of a group? We looked at problems encountered in groups and some solutions to those problems. And finally, we studied the issue of conflict within and between groups, including the presence and impact of cooperation or competition in groups, and mechanisms that may resolve group conflict. The second journal article we were assigned to read focused on social identity theory and intergroup dynamics. In this article, we read about a study that explored the degree to which in-group favoritism and out-group bias was demonstrated by a group of collegiate student athletes and a comparison group of students that were not athletes. Researchers were interested in finding out how teammates, or the athlete group, and the non-athlete group react to misbehavior of an athlete. This is representative of real-world situations that often result in scandal and negative media attention due to the high-profile nature of college sports, such as college football. While the findings of this study did not fully support social identity theory as hypothesized, researchers discovered several areas of interest that would provide opportunity for further study. Notable findings included an overall leniency effect within the student-athlete group and an indication that student-athletes react more negatively when a member of their own student-athlete group demonstrates behavior that is considered extreme misconduct. Conformity and the process of minority influence. Conformity is the tendency to change our perceptions, opinions, or behaviors in ways that are consistent with group norms. While conformity usually occurs as a response to pressure from majority group, Individuals who represent a minority in the same group can demonstrate social influence. This is known as minority influence, or the process by which dissenters produce change within a group. In the study about adolescence and abstention from unhealthy drinking behaviors, researchers found that the majority does not always rule. As referenced earlier in this presentation, the study finds evidence of minority influence. The study found that the presence of non-drinking minority results in a lower probability that majority drinkers in the group continue drinking, getting drunk, or binge drinking if their group includes minority non-drinkers. Moscovici's theory hypothesizes that the majority is powerful because of their number, but the minority exhibits more finesse and gets power from their style of behavior. The minority must be strong, persistent, and resolute, while also appearing flexible and open-minded if they are to exert influence. When challenged by a consistent and balanced dissenter or nonconformist, the majority members will take notice and rethink their position. Compliance through the use of psychological traps. Compliance is defined as changes in behaviors that are elicited by direct request. While requests for compliances are sometimes made directly, more subtle and precise tactics are often used to achieve compliance. How do people get others to comply with what is often a self-seeking request? By studying tactics used by those who are in positions dependent on their ability to influence others to derive benefit, think about advertisers, politicians, and con artists, social psychologists have found that numerous highly manipulative psychological traps are employed to get others to comply with the request. There are many of these subtle techniques, but I will focus on two: foot in the door and door in the face, both of which have been studied in detail. The foot in the door technique is a two-step compliance technique in which the influencer sets the stage for the real request by first getting a person to comply with a much smaller request. The door in the face technique is also a two-step compliance technique in which an influencer prefaces the real request with one that is so large that it's rejected. As you can see from the definition of each, the mechanisms of each are basically opposed. Researchers conducted a study using meta-analysis to compare the efficiency of the techniques. That is, does one technique accomplish the goal of getting an individual to comply with a request more than the other? Overall, they found that the two techniques produced similar effects and no significant differences in efficiencies were noted. Obedience is behavior change produced by the demands of authority. With obedience, the individual's ability to choose is constrained as they receive a demand from some perceived authority. Obedience is not all bad. Obedience to God is important not only in worship, but for our well-being. However, following World War II, people were shaken by the atrocities that resulted from obedience to Adolf Hitler. This gave rise to Milgram's initial study, Behavioral Study of Obedience, published in 1963, and later his book, Obedience to Authority. Referring back to the Milgram study, which we looked at during Module 1, Milgram focused on finding out to what extent people would go to in obeying instructions if it meant harming another person. He wanted to understand how easily people could be influenced to commit horrible deeds committed by the Nazis in World War II. He had participants paired with another person. A Confederate took the role of learner, and the participant was the teacher. The learner was hooked to some electrodes, and the teacher was instructed to give the learner a shock each time they got a question wrong. If a teacher refused to administer a shock, a researcher who was stationed nearby would give progressively intense prods to the point of saying, "You have no other choice," to the teacher to continue administering the shocks. Milgram found that ordinary people are likely to follow orders given by someone they perceive to be an authority figure, especially if their authority is recognized as morally right or legally based. This is destructive obedience. The group dynamic is interesting because an individual who is a member of a group may have influence on the group, and the group can have influence over the individual members. While we may assume that individuals are one and the same as a group to which they belong, research shows that groups can be different than the sum of their individual members. A group is a set of individuals who interacts over time and have shared fate, goals, or identity. Key attributes of groups are the roles of individual members of the group, that is, a set of expected behaviors, norms, which are the rules of conduct for members, and cohesiveness, which happens when the forces exerted on a group push members closer together. To get a better understanding of the dynamics of groups and how they can sometimes be unpredictable, we can look at the group of athletes selected in the study conducted by Hawley, Hosch, and Bovard, summarized earlier. In this study, researchers hypothesized that the group of student athletes would demonstrate in-group favoritism towards other student athletes. Instead, they found that athletes exhibited leniency regardless of athletic status. Further, they found that the group did not display in-group favoritism when a member of their group demonstrated what was considered to be extremely deviant behavior. This indicates that there may have been some negative impact on the group's cohesiveness. A common source of conflict in groups arises when an individual in the group chooses to pursue self-interest instead of cooperating with the group. They choose their inclination to be competitive over the inclination to be cooperative. Choosing competition can be self-destructive and create social dilemma. Social dilemma is a situation in which a self-interested choice by everyone will create the worst outcome for everyone. Negotiation is a mechanism which can be used by the group to resolve social dilemmas. Sometimes negotiation can become a source of conflict when individual members do not agree on what successful negotiation entails. A 50-50 compromise might appear to be the most fair outcome. However, by successfully negotiating, both sides may be able to do better. This is called an integrative agreement. It is a negotiated resolution to a conflict in which all parties obtain outcomes that are superior to what they would have obtained from an equal division of the contested resources. To resolve conflict between groups must establish common ground to build upon. When group members recognize that they have shared identity across group lines, the outgroup member will become more attractive and interaction between groups improves. Recognizing that they have a superordinate identity is one way to establish common ground. The goal is to have members realize that creating conflict is not in their self-interest, but working together is. Whether we are conscious of social influence or not, it is ever present in our daily lives, now more than ever with the development of technology and the prevalence of social media. Each day we encounter a significant number of individuals or groups who wish to persuade us to adopt their religious beliefs, share their political opinions, or simply buy the brand of toothpaste that they are selling. Social influence affects how we think, how we feel, and how we act. Choosing to conform or maintain independence, comply or assert ourselves, and obey or defy a perceived authority figure can give us cause to reevaluate our self-concept and can boost or undermine our self-esteem. Understanding these concepts is critical in securing our psychological well-being. I will close with 2 questions for group discussion. My first question is this. A common theme seen throughout the Bible is the struggle for God's people, from Israelites in the Old Testament to the Christians in present times, to refrain from conforming to the world in which we live. At the same time, we as Christians are instructed to go out into the world and make disciples of all people. Thinking of some of the concepts and theories we have studied regarding social influence, what challenges do we face and what strategies can we use to share our faith in God with others while not conforming to the ways of those we seek to reach? My second question is, how do the social psychology theories and concepts related to groups and group processes apply to the group that is the Christian church? What aspects of group processes are most important for the church, and what aspects might be problematic for the church? This concludes my presentation on social influence. I wish everyone much success as we finish this term.